Allan Johnson and your superb pastor, Bill Nyland. And my brother, Jerry Johnson, was here as intern for a while. You may not know, but he passed away last December. He and his wife are living in Covenant Shores in Washington. So it's good to see familiar friends and to meet some new friends. I'd like to read a psalm this morning, Psalm 30, a psalm of David. I will exalt you, O Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. O Lord my God, I called to you for help, and you healed me. O Lord, you brought me up from the grave and spared me from going down into the pit. Sing to the Lord, you saints of his. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only for a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may remain for a night, but joy comes in the morning. When I felt secure, I said, I will never be shaken. O Lord, then when you favored me, you made my mountain stand firm. But when you hid your face, I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I called. To the Lord I cried for mercy. What gain is there in my destruction, in my going down into the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it proclaim your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be merciful to me. O Lord, be my help. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing to you and may not be shaken. O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever. The word of the Lord.
Praise be to God.
There are many things I miss about raising two sons. But one of them is not riding the roller coaster. I've been there and done that. They strap you into a seat, and you go up slowly, 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 slowly. And finally, at the zenith, if it's a clear day, you can see for miles. But then the descent down, it backs you against the seat, and you almost takes your breath away. Faster and faster you go, only to get to the bottom and start the ride all over again. Thankfully, I've avoided that experience with our grandchildren. I've left that to their parents, and I'll stick with the spinning teacups. The accident it was in Motherwell, Scotland this summer, injuring 7, confirmed my fears. However, we all ride on a roller coaster of life. Maybe our ride has been emotional. The heights of ecstasy one day and the depths of despair the next. Perhaps it's been financial. We're riding high one month and then our investments go south the next. As Frank Sinatra sang, that's life, so they say. You're riding high in April and shot down in May. A song that's now used by the makers of Jardiance in their commercial. Some people have known the joys of being accepted for a job and later get a pink slip, as happened to over 2,000 people at Intel recently and Freightliner. And the roller coaster ride may be spiritual. God is very clear and near one day, and then hides his face another. And this was the experience of David. First, there are phrases such as, you lifted me out of the depths, you healed me, you brought me out of the grave. But then he felt secure and self-satisfied, feeling he would never be moved. Therefore, God hid his face. The Jewish philosopher Martin Buber wrote a book called The Eclipse of God. He said, at times God seems hidden or eclipsed. as with David in this psalm, and Isaiah who prayed, "Truly you are a God who hides himself." Now we know that with a solar eclipse, the sun is not absent. It's just something gets in the way, usually the moon. On August 21st of next year, 2017, there will be a total eclipse of the sun, and we in Oregon are going to be right in the middle of it. And people are making reservations already to come and experience that. But as with the sun, God is not absent. Something gets in the way. And that something might be impatience, indifference, prejudice, avarice, anger. These may be the little moons that get between us and God. But in his praise, David was dismayed. Then he fell to the ground. Because of his pride, David was dismayed, and he felt depressed. He felt going into the pit. He cried out to God, and God heard him and turned his wailing into dancing, and he could praise once again. He removed his sackcloth, which is an ancient symbol of grief and despair, and gave him clothes of joy. Such was the emotional and spiritual roller coaster of David. This psalm was used in the rededication of the temple at the time of the Maccabees, a rather bright spot in the otherwise bleak history of Israel. For me, my nadir, or low point, was my junior year of college. I had transferred from North Park College, our church-related school, to the University of Minnesota, where there are 32,000 students at that time. Our classes were all over 100 in size. Could never talk to a professor, lucky to talk to a teaching assistant. And I felt, what am I doing here? And I felt depressed, and my grades went down, and it was kind of a bad time for me. However, in the winter quarter, we had a Christian student retreat. And the speaker said, if you are a child of God, you are of inestimable worth. Let no one take that away from you. Now, I knew I was a child of God. Therefore, I was of great worth in his eyes. And that gave me self-confidence. And I improved. My outlook on life was more positive, and my grades improved, and I had this confidence. It also helped to have a girlfriend. Earlier, we talked about the pit as a Sheol, or the death, but it can also be a pit of despair and depression. David prayed, "You spared me from going into the pit." In Psalm 104, he said, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name, and forget not all his benefits, including rescuing him from the pit." Tom Hallman, a reporter for the Oregonian, wrote in the paper May 27th of an interview he had with Frank McInnes, a father who lost his son on Mount Hood in the Oregon Episcopal School climbing experience. You may remember that. It was in 1986. His son Patrick was 15 years old. McInnes told Hallman he went through a very tough time after that tragedy. He said, "I cried, I threw things, hit the bottle heavier than I should have." He lost his wood finishing business and went through a divorce. That was his pit. But he said he finally found a counselor who helped him. He said, "I had to face the fact that tremendous loss it was. And I learned that there's a difference between knowing loss and accepting loss. I had to own what happened. Then I had to figure out how I wanted to live my life." And he said, some of the parents clammed up. That's the worst thing you can do. You hold that inside, and it will manifest itself. David didn't do that. He didn't hold it inside. He described his pit and the grave and the one who rescued him. He said in the first 3 verses, he drew me up, he healed me, he lifted me, he restored me. Action words. Our God is a God of action. And while David's praise was personal, it was not private. He invited all the people to praise with him. Sing to the Lord, you saints of his, praise his holy name. Corporate praise is important. And we do that when we worship, in our music, as we have done this morning, our prayers, our personal testimony, our offering, and our communion. Faith is personal, but it's not private. David gave us a great picture of the God he knew. He said his anger lasts only for a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. And God does have anger. Anger at sin, disobedience of his commands, injustice, oppression of the poor and the marginalized. Jesus, his son, showed that anger as he expelled the corrupt money changers from the temple, confronted the priests and the Pharisees for oppressing the poor and the widows and the orphans. He denounced King Herod. Jesus was angry when others were mistreated, but never when he was mistreated. God's anger is never permanent or ultimate. It lasts but a short time. But his favor, his grace and mercy lasts a lifetime. For me, the most impressive verse of this psalm is, weeping may remain for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Verse 5. Weeping is a part of life, and we've all experienced those dark nights of weeping, in the death of a loved one, in times of pain or sickness, facing financial difficulties, or when a child makes some wrong decisions. You can complete the list. The weeping doesn't last forever. Joy comes in the morning. But it's important to remember that that joy may not be the 24-hour day morning. It may be longer than that. Indeed, it may be the morning of death and resurrection. Let's remember, death is not the end of life. It's not like a period at the end of the sentence, more like a semicolon, a pause, implying that something more is coming. And that something more is eternity in God's favor. Joy and happiness are not the same things. Happiness comes from the archaic word hap, H-A-P, a chance occurrence, a happening or happenstance. We feel happy when the weather is favorable and the sun is shining, when we feel good, when we get a promotion or a raise, or perhaps win the lottery. I told people in my church that if they go to Las Vegas or Reno to gamble, they have to double tithe their winnings. Happiness is transitory. Joy, on the other hand, is more permanent. Happiness is like the waves on the ocean that come and go depending on the wind. Joy is more like the current that goes in the same direction constantly, like the Gulf Stream current in the Atlantic Ocean. The joy that God gives is permanent, never changing, because he does not change. Dom Joseph Marmion, an Irish Benedictine monk and spiritual leader of England during World War I, wrote, "Joy is the echo of God's life in us." Jesus said to his disciples at the Last Supper, perhaps his darkest hour before he went to the cross, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete." It's this complete joy that God promises us in the morning. Isaiah wrote, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, because he has given me power to comfort all who mourn, to bestow on them the crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Sometimes joy and weeping merge together. They're not always separate. For example, a few years ago, we had a car accident in our family that took the mother and father of Artis, my wife, and Artis's sister and her husband, leaving two pre-teenage girls orphaned. So in 1 week, we had 2 double funerals, one in Muskegon, Michigan, where her parents lived, and one in South Chicago, where her sister and brother-in-law lived. For the funeral in South Chicago, we had a procession to the cemetery led by 2 hearses, the family car in which we rode, and a long string of other cars of fellow mourners. The hearse, the lead hearse, blew a tire. Everything came to a stop. Fortunately, we were near a gas station, and an attendant came out with a jack and changed the tire. But it seemed like the whole traffic of South Chicago had stopped. It was like a scene from a Fellini movie. And the girls in the family car with us started laughing. They said, our parents would have loved this. And we laughed with them. I would guess that at every funeral and memorial service, there's a moment of joy and humor as we remember the loved one departed. But sometimes joy doesn't come for a long time. And faith calls us to wait for the Lord to bring it, knowing that in heaven it will be real and lasting. Paul's experience in Philippi is a good example. You remember that's where he and Silas were arrested and beaten, thrown into the inner prison, and their backs bleeding against the wall, their feet in stocks. At midnight, they began to sing songs and read prayers, hymns and prayers. That would not be me. I would whimper and complain and maybe whisper a psalm and hymn, but they were so loud that everybody could hear them. Then came the earthquake, and the foundations of the prison were shaken, and the doors flew open, and the chains fell off. And you can read the rest of the story in Acts 15. But it was to that city, Philippi, that Paul wrote the New Testament lesson that Greg read for us today. It began, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." In closing, let me ask ourselves, where are we on the roller coaster of life? In the depths, in the pit, weeping at night, or rejoicing and dancing with the clothes of joy? In either case, let us remember that God is with us and He will bring us joy. Sing to the Lord, all you His saints. Praise His holy name. Amen.